Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for those who brought a dish to the potluck. Thank you, and I hope everyone enjoyed their dinner. And those who are now joining us, welcome. So this is the annual meeting of the Noank Historical Society, and we always begin with a business meeting, and we'll start with the minutes of the last meeting, which was in March.
This is the minutes of the March 19th, 2025 meeting. The meeting was called to order at 7:28 p.m. by President Debbie Bates at Latham Chester Store. Approval of minutes. The minutes of the November 28th, 24 general meeting were read and approved. Reports. There was no treasurer's report as the treasurer was not available. Ann Lowry, the membership secretary, did not give a formal report. However, she thanked all members who contributed to the annual campaign. Other announcements. A volunteer sign-up sheet is available tonight to sign up for docent positions at the Historical Society museums this summer. Future events include participation in the Memorial Day Parade and the annual Noank Art Show, and the annual Noank Historical Society meeting in June. There are plans to continue the Noank Oral History Project. Anyone interested in participating as either an interviewer or interviewee should contact a Noank Historical Society board member. The business meeting was adjourned at 7:32 p.m. The program was Voices of the Past, Memories of Noank in Days Gone By. This presentation included tape recollections of Noank by Albert Patterson, Howard Davis, Bernie Davis, William Palmer, and Ben Rathman. Respectfully submitted, Carol Oviatt, Secretary Pro Tem.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any changes, additions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. And I don't think our treasurer is here once again. Is there a treasurer's report? Our treasurer is not here.
No.
We have money in the checking account and our bills were all paid, so.
That's right.
The membership report.
Good evening. 'Tis the season to renew your NHS membership, or perhaps you'd like to join for the first time. Thanks to our almost 500 members, the Historical Society can bring you programs like the one we're going to hear tonight in this restored building that is such an important meeting place for the community of Noank. Your membership also allows us to keep telling Noank's stories through the newsletters and through our museum exhibits. So current members will soon receive a letter in the mail asking them to renew. To do so, you can send us a check in the enclosed envelope. Or if you prefer to renew or join with a credit card, please go on our website. It's very easy. There are great instructions there. And I will also have membership envelopes and information available after the meeting. Thank you so much for your continued support.
Thank you. And I believe we have election of new board members at this time.
Yes, the nominating committee consisting of myself, Nancy Codian, Joan Butler, and Judith Hess met and nominate 4 people to serve as board of directors in the years 2025 to 2029. They are Debbie Bates, Carol Oviatt, Tim Pratt, and John Wilbur. We will also accept nominations from the floor tonight. We continue to hold a vacancy for a new curator. The vote will be taken on all names and others that may be proposed by the membership.
Okay, time to nominate people from the floor, if anyone so wishes. So, is there a motion to accept the recommendations of the nominating committee?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yes, second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. So, Just a couple of additional notes. The museum on Sylvan Street, the Mary C. Anderson Museum, will be opening officially on Saturday, June 28th, with a reception in the late afternoon. And after that, they will be open Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday afternoons from 1 to 4. And if there's someone who that does not work for and they really want to get into the museum, you can, I think there's a number posted on the door, but if not, on our website, you can let us know and we will get you a special tour. But Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday afternoons. And lots of people here in Noank have never been to our wonderful little museum, and we think it's lovely and something of interest for everybody. So try to get there and poke your head in, even if you just come for 5 minutes, or you can come for the afternoon. But,
I'd also like to say that if you'd like to volunteer as a docent, we can give you an orientation. It's a fun way to meet people. You can greet them and tell them about Noank and point them in the right direction. You could be a docent, see me. I've got about 7 spaces open, Wednesday or Saturdays in the afternoons in the summer, 1 to 4.
and we will have a training session for
Yeah.
anyone who would like it.
That's right.
So see Ann afterwards. So also a fun event that I don't think I have to twist your arm, I think most people do come to, and that is the art show that will be here for the summer. Local artists with their pictures of Noank that they've painted. And their opening reception is the day before the museum's. That is Friday afternoon, June 27th in the afternoon. So come to the reception, come later, and when there are fewer people here, and take a look at the artwork, and maybe you'll find something you would love to take home and live with. So, is there any other business to come before us? Okay. I think we're in for a treat tonight to hear about Lars Thorsen and his artwork. I feel a bit of a connection to Lars Thorsen because I lived in the house where he lived. But there are people here tonight who are actually his descendants who have more claim to him than I do. But he was definitely a local Noanker and a wonderful painter. So the paintings on the walls here tonight, and I will go back a step, and that's this. There was a recent exhibit at the Mystic Museum of Art, which hopefully people got to see. He was a featured artist there earlier, ended on June 1st. But in this room now, we have paintings lent to us for the night by Paul Bates, Jennifer and Chris Lane, Rose and Blake Powell, Betsy Boucher and her family, who are descendants of Lars Thorsen. And there are some pieces here that belong to the Noank Historical Society's collection. So we thank everyone who has lent us their paintings and other pictures for the evening, and hope you get a chance to give them a good look. Our speaker tonight is put together the exhibit at the Mystic Museum and gave a talk at the museum. So it's she's well versed in Lars Thorsen and his art. She also is someone who grew up here in Noank. So we welcome her, and we'll turn the mic over to her.
Hello. Let me see how I can easily get up to the front. Gonna sneak right past everyone.
Betsy, Dad, we were going to ask Amelia to draw a...
Oh, that's right, the 50-50.
Ooh.
Would you do that?
I will be happy to do so.
All right. You can mix them up. You can take them up in front. It's all in your hands.
Ooh.
All
My
right.
capable hands. No pressure.
And the winner will take home...
I do.
How much was it?
For full transparency. All right. So our lucky winner is 279301.
Going once, going twice. All right, we'll try another one.
Wait a minute.
Wait.
What is it, 302?
The last three numbers are 301.
Oh, I guess it's me.
Bingo!
Okay, there you go. Congratulations. Thank you. Oh, we did.
Winner, winner.
Winner, right.
Thanks, Amelia.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, can everybody hear me? Just want to make sure. Perfect. So, Betsy, I will sometimes have to peek around just to make sure that I am on the same note as you. But thank you so much to the Noank Historical Society, both for inviting me here tonight and for loaning works to the Lars Thorsen exhibition. I'd also like to thank the family of Betsy Boucher and her parents and the Jensen family, John Sproul, Chip Anderson, as well as the Mystic Seaport Museum, who also loaned works for this particular exhibition, and to the Connecticut Office of the Arts, who helps fund the Mystic Museum of Art's exhibition program. My name is Amelia Onorato. I am the assistant curator at the Mystic Museum of Art. I do apologize if I get a little bit frazzled during this presentation. We are currently in the middle of installing our upcoming exhibition. So I'm currently stuck in that liminal space between everything that I learned for the previous show and everything that we're putting together for the upcoming one. So I'm not quite fluent in Lars anymore, and I also can't speak fluently about the Mashantucket Pequot Museum. So very interesting fact about me is that I actually grew up in Noank. So it's very fun to be back here in the same room that I have very vivid memories of attending a birthday party in middle school, speaking as a professional. So every year since 2022, the Mystic Museum of Art has picked a theme that we explore through the curatorial programs. Our first year was the year of narrative art. That was the year that we had the Norman Rockwell exhibition in the summer, if you remember. This year, our theme is all about migration. Because if you go back far enough, every one of us in this room is an immigrant. My father came from France in 1978. My mom's family came over from Ireland in the 1800s. And even if you go back to the Mashantucket Pequot folks, their people came across the land bridge. So we all have that in common. It's something that ties us all together. So this year, we're trying to explore the ideas of how do you adapt? How does your identity change? Who decides where you belong? And how and why? Because throughout history, human beings have moved from one place to another for a season, for a lifetime, alone, in groups, whether it's because of you were fleeing hardship or because you're drawn by opportunity. Earlier this year, we had an exhibition called the One World Project that is all about how stories traveled across countries and time and how they evolve as that happens. Our upcoming exhibition, Gifts of the Ocean, is in partnership with the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, is about being forced to leave your homeland and working to keep your culture and your identity intact despite all of the obstacles that are in your way. And Lars Thorsen, from Norway to Noank, obviously was the story of an immigrant whose experiences sailing around the world influenced his art. So out of curiosity, how many of you did have a chance to see the exhibition? Wonderful. So there will be some overlap. You'll see some things that you already knew, but I am taking this opportunity to be a little bit nerdier about the history than we had time to do and space to do in the actual exhibition. I figure since we're all no-anchors in this room, that's right up all of our alley. So Betsy, could you advance to the next slide, please? So Lars Thorsen was born in Stavanger, Norway in 1876. He lived all his life in sight of the sea and ships and experienced every phase of such a life. So by turns, he worked as a mess boy, a cabin boy, a merchant sailor. He had rounded Cape Horn, or Cape Styx, as he jokingly called it, 4 times before he was 20 years old. And twice he raced in the America's Cup. before moving to Noank in 1904. Here, he worked as a sailmaker, as a master rigger, and also as a Grand Banks fisherman before becoming a member of the Mystic Art Association, which is the predecessor of the Mystic Museum of Art, in 1925. Or at least that was the first year that we know for sure he exhibited artwork there. And I think what a fun point of note is that he was 49 years old when he had started really working on an artistic career. So another chapter of his life. But to really set the scene, to understand who Lars was, we have to go back to the age of sail. So between the 15th and 19th centuries, sailing ships dominated both global trade, warfare, and exploration. That was the time of the famous Spanish Armada. It was when the Europeans discovered the New World, for better or worse, which you can learn more about in our upcoming exhibition, Gifts of the Ocean, opening on June 27th. And the ship that is actually depicted here was on loan from the collection of John Sproul for our Lars Thorsen exhibition. And it depicts the Great Republic, which was actually a very famous tall ship. It was the largest fully rigged ship in the world when she was constructed. So all of her masts were square rigged. She was launched in Boston in 1853, and she completed her maiden voyage from Boston to Liverpool in only 18 days in 1853. And that was a trip that usually averaged 30 to 45 days at that time. So, Betsy, if you would. So this is a map of typical shipping routes. This particular one is probably dating back to the 1850s and was used in an edition of Carl C. Cutler's Greyhounds of the Sea, the story of the American clipper ship that was very, very helpful in putting together the Lars Thorsen research for this exhibition. It shows the shipping routes, but also the durations. So it might be a little bit hard for some of you guys to see, but I don't even know if you can see my little thing here. So every single line goes through and kind of tells you how long these legs would have taken. So an important one to note is prior to 1812, if you were trying to get from New York to China, that could take between 125 days to 6 months, depending on what the weather conditions were. By the 1830s, clipper ships were doing that same voyage in about 100 days. So they were going significantly faster, And I bring that up because, Betsy, please. This is the ship that is credited with being the reason why clipper ships exist. This is the Paul Jones. It was on loan from Betsy's family's collection for the Lars Thorsen exhibition. It was also our flagship image, so probably this is the one that you would all recognize from our newsletter, social media posts. This is also a Massachusetts ship. It was launched in 1843. And on her maiden voyage, she transported the first U.S. shipment of ice to China for the Ice King, Frederick Tudor. So keep in mind, that trip averaged between 100 to 125 days and up to several months. So it seems bold to be shipping ice to China, but he felt good about it, and they managed to get it there. But ironically, considering that you would typically expect it to be a fast ship, her return trip from China took so long that Nathaniel Palmer, her captain, lost his mind, basically. And he was like, there has to be a better way. And so he came up with the first design that would be known as a clipper ship. So if you wouldn't mind, Betsy. Oops, sorry. So clipper ships are different from like barks or brigs or ketches or yawls. There isn't a set number of masts. There isn't a set determination of rigging that qualifies it as a clipper. Usually the unifying factor is that they are narrow for how long they are along the water, and they're also very deep, so they can carry a lot of cargo, but they also have a smaller body that they're trying to get through the ocean, and that is why they became to be so fast. So any speedy ship at that time, even if it was technically a bark, could also be referred to as a clipper, which is confusing if you're not well-versed about boats. The height of the Mystic Clipper era was in 1852, and that was the year that 200 clipper ships rounded Cape Horn in just 1 year. And they only had a very small season to do so because of the weather. So a lot of them probably were going around at the same time. And clipper ships were made all over the world, but Mystic and Noank specialized in them. A couple years ago, when it was the 100th anniversary of the Bascule Bridge, we did an exhibition at the museum that I got to get very nerdy about, especially because the Mystic River is only about 5 miles long from its origin to where it empties here in Noank Harbor. And in the middle of the 1800s, there were 11 shipyards operating. So on both sides of the river, every half mile, there was a shipyard. And if there was a ship being constructed north of the bridge, it could only be 45 feet wide because the original bridge was a swing bridge. So it couldn't rise up the whole way like the current one does. So you had a post in the middle, and that meant that folks at the Greenville Yard, anyone further up, needed to design a ship that could pass through that thing. And sometimes they said there was only an inch of space on either side. And so they'd be pulling them with like ox carts on both sides of the river. But Mystic was obviously a huge shipbuilding town and became very well known for it. So the image that we have here is actually one from the Noank Historical Society. I don't think I took the best quality image there, but it depicts the Dauntless, which was the last full-rigged ship built in Mystic in 1869. And it's encountering the Thomas Dana is on the far side on the horizon in a chance encounter rounding Cape Horn in 1874. The captains were from Noank, and I know this story because of Betsy, so thank you. So John Palmer Wilbur and Robert Palmer Wilbur were each captains of these different ships. John, who was on the Thomas Dana, on the other side, he was en route from San Francisco to Liverpool. And Robert, who was on the Dauntless, was heading from New York to San Francisco. So heading in opposite directions. So Betsy, if you wouldn't mind. So we're back to our map because the only point that those two courses intersect is, there we are, right at Cape Horn. So both of their voyages were about 13,000 nautical miles. And so the chances that they would reach Cape Horn at the same time were astronomical, but they actually did see each other. They were able to hail each other's ships, have this nice reunion at sea, and unfortunately that was the last time that they ever saw each other because John did not survive the remainder of his trip. He never returned home. So I will point out the duration of these trips again. On this map, it says that it would take 130 days to go all the way from New York around Cape Horn and then back up to San Francisco. But there was a speed record set by one of the Mystic clipper ships called the Andrew Jackson, which completed that journey in 89 days. And that was never broken by a sailing vessel until the opening of the Panama Canal. So Betsy, would you mind? So here we are back at Cape Styx, which was a nickname for Cape Horn. It was a necessary but dangerous evil. So high risk, high reward. You could get people, you could get supplies from the east coast of the US to the west coast, but at what cost, basically? So it takes a lot of time. It took a lot of lives as well. It's estimated that between the 16th and 20th centuries, that 800 ships sank and 10,000 sailors died. Yes, while attempting to round the Horn. So everybody kind of agreed there had to be a better way. There must be something that we could do about this. So Betsy, if you wouldn't mind. So pop quiz. Does anyone know who this man is?
Give us a clue.
Give us a clue. He was a famous designer of canals. If You love canals. Betsy, with you in mind. So Ferdinand de Lesseps is the man without whom we would not have the Suez Canal. So he was the one who designed it. It was his brainchild. It opened in 1869, connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Seas, and substantially reduced sailing distances and times between Europe and East Asia. So it was such this big revolutionary marvel of technology to open that interlocking canal that they attempted to repeat that success with the Panama Canal. So France broke ground on that project in 1881, which happened to be the same year that Lars Thorsen first stepped foot on a boat in Norway when he was between 5 and 6 years old. Remember Lars? This is a talk about Lars. So Betsy, if you wouldn't mind. So here we are again, and I would like to credit Betsy's father, Mike, for providing me a huge documentation of photographs. And so it's believed that this is Lars as a baby. He did have a backward approach. Oh, I skipped ahead. Look at me. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, so Lars, as I said, lived all of his life in sight of the sea and ships. He was born in Stavanger, Norway, which was, just like Noank and Mystic, a bustling shipbuilding town at that time. His whole family was involved in the shipbuilding industry. His grandfather was a ship's blacksmith, and his father was a ship's mate. And from his schoolhouse, Lars could see the ships in the harbor, and he spent a lot of time sketching and dreaming about them. He would also occasionally borrow small sailboats. And again, thanks to Lars's descendants, we at the museum were given access to an unpublished memoir that Lars had been working on called Bilgewater that is amazing. To keep in mind also, this is a man who English was not his first language. It's really engrossing, and apparently at one point he did try to get it published, but that was at a time when there still were a lot of these old salt dogs, these old sailors about in the world, and there wasn't, unfortunately, a lot of interest in actually picking up the project and publishing it. So when we say it's unfinished, the family actually thinks it was finished, but part of it was lost. But I do want to read a couple of excerpts because they really give you a sense of who he was, what his sense of humor was like. And again, it's really commendable that writing in a language that is not your first, it's so engaging. So going back to being a boy in Norway when he was 10 or 12 years old, if we could not borrow a boat honestly, we would wait around until the owner from some nearby island would do his or her shopping and then borrow the boat just the same. I remember one time 4 or 5 of us kids borrowed a boat that way. We even put up the sail that time, but to our sorrow, on our return, the owner of the boat was right there to meet us. And he didn't look very friendly, I can assure you. I made up my mind before I would let that big farmer put his hands on me, I'd jump overboard first. And that is just what I'd done, and I reached shore safely. So Betsy, could I have the next one, please? So Lars did sketch the boats from his schoolroom, as I mentioned. His family all tried to dissuade him from pursuing a life on boats because of how dangerous it was. Almost every single family that was in Stavanger and most shipbuilding and fishing communities had at least one member, if not more, who had perished. Like, think again, 10,000 people died trying to go around Cape Horn. So by the time Lars was about 10, he was living with his aunt and uncle because his mother had passed away, and his father was often away at sea and knew firsthand how dangerous and awful everything could be. But no matter what anybody said, Lars could not be dissuaded. And when he was 13 years old, he finally wore down the family, and he got to travel with his father on the Icelandic steamer that he was first mate on. So they went from Norway to Iceland, where they picked up horses. They brought those to England. They made an exchange, I believe, for coal, and then ended up returning back to Norway. It was a 3-month trip, and Lars did not consider it a true voyage because it was on a steamship, and because he had to be a mess boy. He told everybody that he was a cabin boy, but he was somehow embarrassed to be an assistant to the chef. So in Bilgewater, there's this great bunch of stories about what happened on board there. An interesting thing to note is that the cook was actually a woman, and this was in the 1880s, about 1888 or 1889. So it seems like she did have quite a storied past. Lars never mentions her by name, but he does speak very highly of her, and obviously, you know, as an old man, was thinking about her. And there was one quote that she said, that, you know, you see, son, out here you in a world, you are, oh my God, you see, son, out here you are in a little world by yourself. There is not a place in the whole world like the sea. You are away from all the things that make living ashore so damn unbearable. So again, Lars was not the most thrilled about his first experience at sea. However, he was very happy when he got paid. So I will read that little section as well. My first paying off day, I had something to show for my hard-earned wages, for I was very proud of a new suit and a sailor's cap I bought in Liverpool. A cap that most sailors wore in them days. The underside of the visor was green-colored and stamped in white letters, real English leather. I am sure this will bring back many old memories to some of you readers. I can see myself walking down the street, trying to walk as bow-legged as I could, as, of course, all sailors should walk, looking at myself in store windows as I passed by, the English cap pushed up on my head and a little over to starboard, so the real English leather would show, and a big chew of tobacco in my mouth. He's a 13, by the way. That was English too, the tobacco I mean, and to make myself more noticed, especially if there was anyone in the neighborhood that knew me, I would step over to the curb and spit in the gutter. I wished it was winter with snow on the ground, so it would have been more noticeable with that dark brown tobacco juice in the snow. So, Betsy, can you go to the next one, please? So here we have the Semiramis. So Lars, as I started to say, had a backwards approach to life on the sea. At that point, at the tail end of the Age of Sail, most sailors were transitioning from tall-masted sailing ships to metal steamships. And Lars was like, nah, I did steam, I want to go back to sail. So the first voyage I mentioned was 3 months long. The next one, which he considered his first true time at sea, was a 13-month journey. So again, he was 13 when he left. He was 14 when he came home. And if this was my first experience, I would not have gone back. So on that trip, Lars went on his first trip around Cape Horn. It took 10 days to complete in the weather. 3 men abandoned ship in Pensacola, Florida, because they were about to head to Rio de Janeiro, which was on the verge of a revolution and filled with yellow fever. So these guys were like, no, thank you, we're just leaving here. So actually 3 other men were shanghaied. They were literally made too drunk at the harbor, brought aboard, and then by the time they sobered up, they were too far out at sea to be able to go back home. And one was a Frenchman, one was from Texas, and Lars said that they actually ended up being wonderful sailors, like they had a great time. However, in Rio, Lars did catch yellow fever and had to go to the hospital. There was a very strong storm, and a man fell from the yardarm and died. And then has anyone in here seen Moana or watched it with your family or grandchildren? Many times, I'm sure. So remember Hey Hey, the dumb rooster in that? There was the equivalent of a Hey Hey on the Semiramis. It was a rooster named Peter, who someone felt bad for because he was looking very sad in his cage, so they opened it up and he flew overboard and was never seen again. Which is very bad luck, as it turns out, if you are superstitious. And so a lot of Bilgewater is about Lars's experience on the Semiramis, because obviously it was a very, very formative time in his life. And so I do want to read one last excerpt. It's a little bit long, so I'll summarize it. And so basically he starts to talk about at night, Often you wouldn't encounter other ships in the middle of the sea. Sometimes you would if you were going around Cape Horn or other places where there was a lot of overlap. But often you wouldn't see ships for days. And if you did see one, it was very exciting because there obviously was no internet or ways to keep busy aboard. And so there were long stretches where there was nothing going on. And at night, you were supposed to keep lanterns lit in the same way that we have navigation lights today. But a lot of captains would kind of let that slide. It was a waste of oil. It was expensive. People might not pay attention, and then you catch fire. That's the last thing you want to do at sea. And so all of that is to say that they didn't. They hadn't set any lanterns. And Lars was 14. He was on watch. The one bell had just been struck, so it was the dog watch. It's about 1 a.m. And the port watch is getting ready to relieve the wheel and look out waiting for 8 bells. Then all of a sudden, a cry from forward. "A green light on the port bow, luff her up." That sounded bad because we were already close-hauled and the weather clues on the main were lifting every time. She went down heavy in those swells. What could be done? So there's huge waves, it's dark, you can't see anything, and someone in the little gap between waves thought they saw a light from another ship. A big 3-masted, full-rigged ship coming almost head-on, showing her green light. If our lights had been out, she would have seen our red light, so they had no idea that Lars's boat was there. Lights or no lights, something had to be done, and quickly. I have seen boys run and heard them holler before, but tonight it was bedlam. Men were running this way and that. It seemed like they were in each other's way most of the time. The ship this time was up in the wind. I never have heard such a racket of slotting of sails, rattling of chains, and slamming of blocks. It sounded like everything was adrift up aloft and coming down. We knew that our lives depended entirely on being cool-headed. Orders and shouting were heard bow to stern. The mate was standing on the port cathead, swinging his long arms. "Keep her off, she is showing her red light." "No, it's the green, luff her up, luff her up." The commands were coming so fast, everyone was yelling and swearing at each other. I didn't know who was who and what was what, and then I heard the captain's command, "For God's sake," and he did not swear very often. "Douse the jibs, pull in on the mizzen sheet, about ship." "No, she won't make it in time. She is in irons. She is falling off again. She's hanging in the wind, and she will run us down." And here she was coming head on, straight for us, like a phantom ship, a ghost ship. A bad dream, a nightmare. She came booming out of the darkness. What stands out clearest is that big, enormous bowsprit and those big jibs, like some monstrous bags full of wind. She was more than double the size of our ship. If she had struck us, there wouldn't have been a piece of plank big enough to left to float a man. Another moment and she was gone. A great silence fell upon all of us, broken only by the slatting of sails and rattling of blocks. And then suddenly we realized it was not a dream nor a nightmare, but real fact. We were snatched out of death's jaw. From this happening in suspense and tense moment, it is difficult to understand our feelings. We were simply numb, standing there looking at one another. She passed so close that the backwash from the sea and foam she made swept across our deck. It was only a matter of minutes and it was all over, but to all of us it seemed to be hours from the time we first saw her lights until she passed us. One more thing that stands out clear in my mind is the faces on the crew of that phantom ship. As I close my eyes, I can see them. The light from our galley doors seemed to be unusually bright. It struck them right in their faces. They didn't look like men, not live men. They were ghosts with queer, scared expressions on their faces, or rather no expression. They seemed to me like heads made of wax put up there. So yeah, I would have gone back home to Norway and stayed there forever. But that did not stop Lars. So Betsy, if you wouldn't mind. So for 12 years, between 1889 and 1901, Lars traveled the world. He was on many ships, from sailboats that were transporting grain and lumber to paddle boats that were moving bananas in the Caribbean. And again, thanks to the Boucher family, if you go forward to the next one, This is 2 pages. It's a scan from what is essentially Lars's maritime passport. So it lists the last several ships that he traveled on, including some of the places where he had gone. I had, when I was doing all the research for this exhibition, I had these big dreams of taking that world map and being able to plot exactly where Lars had gone and when. Would have been really cool. But instead, all we were able to know is that he worked on at least 12 different vessels in that time. Sometimes they were very short legs, maybe a couple months here or there. The longest trip that he was on was, as far as we know, the Allegro, which is on this list, and went from November 8th, 1894 to October 21st, 1896. And we know that he disembarked in Le Havre, France, which is the largest port in France. Fun facts. So the note at the bottom, again, thank you to the Boucher family. I'm going to keep singling you guys out. Betsy's dad reached out to relatives who still live in Norway and speak Norwegian to try and figure out what is going on here. And so basically that paragraph at the bottom gives Lars permission to go to America in 1903, which may coincide with when he sailed aboard the Columbia. So would you go to the next one? So the Columbia was designed by Nathaniel Herreshoff and was at the time the only America's Cup defender to successfully defend the Cup twice, in 1889 and in 1901. And then they did try to defend the Cup a third time, and that's when they lost. And so Lars was known to have raced on it twice, once in 1901 and then again in 1903. And in one of those, he injured his back. And it was an injury that would come back sometimes and flare up and kind of affected him. So, trivia for all of the sailors in the room. If the Columbia was the first ship to successfully defend the America's Cup twice, what was the second? Oh, we got a voice in the back. Close. Was it Courageous? Was it Intrepid? I thought it was Intrepid. Am I wrong? I'm looking at my mom.
I think both did. But
Both did? Okay.
Courageous definitely did.
Okay, then I stand corrected. I'm clearly not a voice of authority here, and I should end this talk early because I have no idea what I'm talking about. So we'll just ignore that for a second and acknowledge that at some point, either in 1901 or 1903, Lars did suffer a back injury. And then, Betsy, if you'd go forward one more. In 1900, he also got married to a Norwegian woman named Christine Rasmussen. They got married in February of 1900. And if you can think back to that passport scan a couple of slides ago, in June of 1900, Lars went on his last long voyage to Australia and then came home in 1901. So he was gone for about a year right after getting married. So it's interesting to note that after that 1901 trip, he did not do long voyages at sea anymore. So whether that was due to a back injury in the America's Cup, whether that was due to being a newlywed, maybe both. The fact remains that he went from sailing on ships to rigging them. So he was still involved in the boating industry, just not actively going out to sea. So if you'd go forward again. And so finally, we come to Noank. Lars moved here either in 1903 or 1904. I've seen published documentation that says both. But by 1906, for sure, Lars, his wife Christine, and their daughter Rosalie were living here. But we've already established that someone lived in the house where the Thorsens had lived. It's right on Front Street over here across from the Ram Island Yacht Club, as I'm sure that you are all very well aware. And before the yacht club was there was a dock, as is the case in many places in Noank, and Lars did keep a fishing vessel there, the Clara M. So if you'd go to the next one, please. So Lars worked as a fisherman periodically in the 1910s. For those of you who did get to see the Lars Thorsen exhibition, in a wall-mounted display case, we had a postcard on loan, again from Betsy's family, that was written by Lars to Christine in 1914 when he was on Block Island on a fishing trip, and just writing to let her know that the weather was not doing well, but hopefully they would be home soon. And he also was a master rigger at the Palmer Shipyard. And that was where he befriended another artist named Thomas Ferrier Peterson, who also was from Norway and was a self-taught artist himself. And so in the mid-1920s, Thomas Peterson was hired to paint 3 murals for the Maritime Savings Bank in New London. They're huge. They're 10 by 10. 2 of them you can see in the stairwell at the Lyman Allen if you visit that museum. The other is, I believe, back at the Mystic Seaport Museum, who houses them. And unfortunately, Thomas Peterson passed away relatively young in 1928, and so Lars actually was hired to complete that final mural, which depicted a dock at the foot of State Street in New London, depicting what that town looked like during the height of the age of whaling, so like in the 1850s. And it was because of his friendship with Thomas, it was because of taking over that project that Lars was like, actually, I really love to sketch. He used to sketch when he wasn't busy on ships. And so he kind of started pursuing art in earnest, as I mentioned, when he was in his 40s. So it's never too late for anyone. So Betsy, if you go on to the next one, please. So that is a photograph of the Mariners Savings Bank. And you can see, the glare is a little bit hard, but where's my little thing? So if you go up here, these 2 tall, narrow murals, those were ones that Lars was hired to complete himself after the Peterson mural. Both of those are in the Mystic Seaport Museum's collection, and they depict seal hunting. So they're actually rather gruesome if you see them in person, but beautifully executed, not his usual subject matter. And so following all of these things in the 1920s, Lars began really painting. He started exhibiting at a New London, technically a grocery store, but it had a little section that was dedicated to art. That was the Brader Gallery. And then he, as I mentioned, joined the Mystic Art Association in 1925 and became a founding member of the Noank watercolorists in 1939. So he was very involved around here. And like Thomas Peterson, he was largely self-taught. So despite being a self-taught artist, Lars's paintings were extremely well received by his artistic colleagues. A lot of the founding and early members of the Mystic Art Association had been trained in the academic style, which meant that they had to follow certain rules, they had to study certain ways, they had to paint certain subjects. So it was a very regimented, very strict, competitive sport, essentially. So the fact that folks who were classically trained really loved what Lars was bringing to the table is high praise. So he was part of the Mystic Art Association. He was a member of the Connecticut Academy of Fine Arts, or CAFA. Throughout his artistic career, Lars won numerous awards and commissions, and his work today is represented in several institutions, including the Noank Historical Society, the Mystic Museum of Art, the Mystic Seaport Museum, the Lyman Allen, and the Stavanger Museum in Norway. They have one of his paintings. So Betsy, if you would go to the next one, please. So in the same way that in writing, they say, write what you know, in Lars's case, he would paint what he knew, what he had lived in a previous life. So Lars focused on maritime painting and had the distinction of being a maritime artist who was familiar with life at sea. So those of you who may have attended looking at art sessions at the Mystic Museum of Art in the past with our former director, Susan Fisher, will know that she was very fond of showing you a painting, asking you to look at it closely, and remark on what you see. So I will throw that into the room for you guys. And there's no wrong answer. So what do we see? What is a marked distinction? So we do have a sailboat front and center, two-masted, and they are gaff rigged. So they've got fore and aft sails, which means that it might be a ketch. But one thing that I always look for when I look at a maritime painting is where is the wind coming from?
From behind.
From behind. And everything agrees that the wind is coming from behind, right? Because sometimes you'll see a beautiful painting and then you look closer and you're like, the flag's going this way, the sails are going that way, the water's going that way. So Lars was very, very spot on with all of his details, including not only where the wind is coming from, but why the wind is coming from. So this depicts a fog bank. There is a weather front that is coming towards the ship. And so anyone who has sailed and seen that on the horizon knows that as that weather is heading towards you, so does the wind. And so the ship heading away from it is all going downwind, which I find nice. So Betsy, if you'd go on to the next one, please. Yeah. So Lars did occasionally find his patients wearing thin when non-sailors would criticize some of the authenticity of his work. So there was one great story that Chip actually told me, because he loaned a beautiful folding screen to us for the Lars Thorsen exhibition, about the time that Lars went to New York and was trying to sell a painting to a gentleman who didn't think that the rigging was particularly correct. And Lars said, okay. And then he went to his coat and he got a pair of mittens out of his pocket and he waved it under the man's nose and said, I have wrung more seawater out of these mittens than you have seen in your entire life. And the painting in question here, this is actually part of the Coast Guard's collection. And has a great story associated with it. So Lars was commissioned to paint this ship, and I cannot for the life of me remember which ship it is, I apologize. But when he handed it in, they were like, this is beautiful, this is exactly what we wanted. However, would you paint out the rust stains around the portholes? So Betsy, would you go to the next one, please? We're gonna enhance the image. And so they were like, this isn't ship shape. This isn't how we want the Coast Guard to be represented. And Lars was like, but it would be rusty. Like, there's no way, or that's how it would look. And so for accuracy's sake, he refused the Coast Guard's request to touch up the rust stains. And so that is how the piece looks today. Yes, exactly. Betsy, next slide, please. So we move on into the 1930s. We've got the Great Depression going on. This particular painting, belongs to the collection of John Sproul, who loaned us it for the Lars Thorsen exhibition. It's called Red Sails, and a painting by that name was exhibited at the Mystic Art Association in 1935. So there is a good chance it is that painting, and in doing research for the show, we found out that in 1930, Lars and Christine went back to Norway for the first time since they'd left in 1906. So in Bilgewater, there are several segments where he's definitely nostalgic for the town that he left behind and going back and seeing how much things had changed. And so there was a section talking about when he was 13, leaving on the Semiramis. There were red-sailed boats in the harbor, which apparently was a very distinctive Norwegian trait for sailing ships. And so the fact that in 1930 we know that he went back to Norway, and then in 1935 was exhibiting works that portrayed sailing ships with red sails, makes me think, without empirical proof, that he may have been nostalgic and kind of thinking about that time again. So Lars was really branching out into a bunch of different directions. I highly recommend you look around at all the beautiful artwork if you have not already, once I'm done yapping at you, because he was painting on unconventional materials. He was painting on seashells. The Noank Historical Society has several beautiful scallop shells that he painted on. But he was also trying to figure out ways to inexpensively and quickly produce artwork, because times were so hard for everyone. You had to be able to price artwork at a rate that people could afford to buy. And so he was doing a lot of works on paper. You'll see a lot of etchings that were appearing around this time, and also monotypes, which was he would paint in oil paint on either a sheet of glass or a piece of metal, and then he would print that onto a piece of paper. So it was a much quicker way of doing an oil painting. So you save on materials, you save on time, you can really crank them out, but they are a monotype. So even if you reapply the paint to make the same image over and over again, there's always that user error. So no two pieces, even if they might be the same scene of a breaking wave, will ever look truly alike. And the Noank Historical Society has several beautiful monotypes. Lars in the 30s was also employed by the Federal Art Project, which was part of the Works Progress Administration, started by FDR to help support writers, artists, playwrights, all of that stuff, to kind of keep the spirit, to feed the soul as well as feeding the body during the Great Depression. And between 1939 and 1941, Lars created 81 works of art for the Federal Art Project. And unfortunately, today, many of them are not known. Their whereabouts have been lost. A lot of these projects were created to produce artwork for schools. Oh my goodness. Hospitals, things of that kind. And so a lot of the places where Lars's art was known to have gone, like Fort Wright on Fisher's Island, the Mystic Oral School, the Women's Sanatorium, a lot of those places closed down, and no one really knows where the artwork went. So hopefully someone just left the building and it's hanging in someone's boudoir and it's in a beautiful place being well loved. But it is sad to know that we don't know where a lot of these are. So Betsy, next slide, please. So now we move forward to 1947, and that was Lars's first solo exhibition at the Marine Historical Association, which is now better known as the Mystic Seaport Museum. Lars was an honorary lifetime member, and they did mount a small exhibition of 18 oil paintings, several small works, a sea chest, some ditty bags. They were up for a month. Boy Scouts got to tour them. It was all very exciting. And a portrait was done of Lars Thorsen by Robert Brackman, who is another mystic artist that I'm sure is ringing a couple of bells. He was one of the most in-demand portrait artists of the 20th century. So the fact that in honor of his friend who got a solo exhibition, Brackman did a portrait of him in pastel, is very striking.
Do we have it?
I didn't get a picture of it, unfortunately, but it was in the show. I only had an ID picture of that piece, and there's a bit, you could see my reflection in it, so no, thank you. But it is lovely. And so now we have a series of slides that kind of go into what I really Lars Thorsen is one of my favorite artists in the collection at the Mystic Museum of Art. I know Kara feels the same way. And not only does he seem like he was a wonderful human that everybody really loved, but he was, if you want to go forward one, kind of an artistic chameleon. So we have, this is, the next four pieces are part of our permanent collection. Some of them actually were not in the show because I didn't have enough room. This was actually one of the most fun exhibitions I've worked on for one of our historic artists, because usually they weren't terribly well known outside of this area, and so it's hard to find enough work by one person and enough information about one person. And the longer we were working on this project, the more people were coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, I love Lars, I have works by him. And we got a phone call from a very lovely woman 2 days before we opened saying, I have pieces you can borrow. And we were like, we've already hung the show, I'm sorry, we don't have any more room. So we actually had to put away some pieces from our permanent collection in order to showcase pieces that we hadn't been able to before. So this is an etching, as you can see. That's one of the Harvstein reprints. So in 1976, I think, several copper plates that Lars had drawn on were found in a Noank attic. And Harv Stein of Stone Ledge Gallery, he cleaned them and restored them, and they were able to pull a limited series of prints of those designs. So ours is one of those. Betsy, will you go to the next one? So this is Cheesebro's Wharf. That's also one of ours. Beautiful impressionistic style, very different stylistically to the etching that we just saw. Next one, please. Another one, slightly, still impressionistic, but a lot less loose. This one's a lot tighter. And then one last one, please. Yeah. So this is very unusual, actually, for Lars. I don't know if you were clocking it as we were going through all of these. Even though he was painting ships that people would have been on, people very rarely appear in his works. There might be like a couple little dots that suggest a person, but it was very, very uncommon for him to do just a straight portrait like this. So this is in pastel. He was working in oils. He was doing etchings. He was doing knot work. He was drawing. He was doing all kinds of things. And it actually reminds me a little bit of, to go on a complete and total segue, Orson Welles. The great cinematographer was interviewed much later in his life about how influential he was on the medium of film and all of the things that he invented and all of the tricks that he made happen. And someone asked, like, you know, how did you think of doing that? And he's like, well, I was young and I was dumb and I didn't know I couldn't. So I just did it. So if you don't know something's impossible, you do it anyway. And I like to think of Lars in his 50s, meeting all of these artists who were pastel artists, who were watercolorists, who were etching, and being like, how hard could it be? Let me try. And as far as we can tell, he was amazing at everything that he did try. So last one, please. And so I am going to leave you with the very image and quote that actually greeted people at the Lars Thorsen exhibition. To come over here, this is another quote from Bilgewater. What a wonderful sight, sails bellied out like big balloons, yards and booms bent like bows, one of the finest sights I have ever seen. What a picture she would have made hanging over some fireplace. And then lo and behold, we have a picture of Lars talking to young people with one of his paintings over a fireplace. So thank you. Thank you. So, does anyone have any questions while I'm here? Yes?
Where did they stop spelling the name of Cape Horn, just H-O-R-N? It's named for the town in Holland called
Yes.
Hoorn,
Yes.
H-O-O-R-N.
Yeah, isn't there an E at the end too?
I beg your pardon?
Isn't there an E at the end of H-O-O-R-N-E, I think originally?
I didn't see that, I don't know.
Okay. So the answer, short answer, I don't know. That was not part of my research for this particular exhibition, but it's a very interesting question. We should look it up. But,
Well, on one of your slides,
Yes.
the Semiramis,
Mhm.
on the lower right-hand corner it was S-E, and on the upper left-hand
Yep.
corner it was spelled differently.
It was, so that is actually a case of Lars making a mistake. Because we were able to find the actual shipping records, and it was Semiramis. A lot of ships were named after historical women or queens, and so Semiramis was an Assyrian warrior queen going way back. So not sure how people in Norway found out about her to name a ship after her, but that is with the E is the generally accepted spelling. And so with the way that Lars had spelled it was the only time I ever saw it. Even in his memoir, he spells it with an E.
Oh, okay. That's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there something about Louis?
Oh, yes. So I didn't even think to include it in this talk, but very, very briefly in the 1920s when Lars first started trying to sell his artwork at the Curator Gallery in New London, he would sign his work Louis Thorsen or Louis Thorsen, possibly trying to like appeal to an American audience. But by 1926, he was using Lars again, so it didn't seem... Actually, now probably it's more worth more if you're an art collector to find a Louis Thorsen than it would be to find a Lars Thorsen.
Yeah.
Do you know why he moved here?
So he had come to Mystic and Noank in the 1890s when he was on one of the ships that he was traveling the world. And there was something, an article, and of course now I can't remember which one it was. My head is full of wampum. But he had mentioned like the fact that Noank was a shipbuilding town, very similar to where he grew up, was appealing to him. And so I don't know why he settled on Noank exactly, but obviously he was very happy here because he stayed here. But that's a good question, I don't know. So,
Are you coming back to talk about wampum Sunday?
Yeah, why not? Happy to do so. So thank you again. As a Noank girl, it's very nice to be back here. Thank you.
I was supposed to